Isn't knitting socks on the machine super fun and addicting? So I'm going to show you today how to knit some socks on a standard gauge machine. I've shown some slipper socks that I've made before, but I want to show you guys how to make standard gauge socks with whatever your favorite sock yarn is. Hey machine knitters, I'm Danielle from loveyourknittingmachine.com, and I have a pattern for you guys today so that you can make any size sock with any yarn on any flatbed knitting machine. So I'm super excited to bring this to you, and I'll leave all the links in the description below and in the comments. There are a couple things I love about this pattern and one thing that maybe isn't so great. So I want to share that with you guys, and I'm also going to be sharing some tips for when you are short rowing your toes and your heels in your sock. So let's get started making possibly your very first set of socks.
I'm doing my cast on at tension 1 so that the top of the sock is not too tight for around the calves. Then I'm setting my carriages back to plain knitting, switching the lever so it's not too tight, and setting my tension to 2 on both the main bed machine and the ribber.
Now I did do ribbing on these socks, but if you don't have a ribber, you can always do a mock rib. I prefer a 2 by 1 needle out of work mock rib. I think it just looks a little bit nicer because that needle out of work is so wide. I think the 2 in work looks nice. So you can do that. Or I have a 2-inch rib here. You don't need a 2-inch rib. You can actually decide how long you want your rib to be. So you could have a 6-inch rib that you're planning to fold over. But you can also do just a 1-inch rib or a 1/2 inch rib if you don't have a ribber. So there are lots of different options.
So when you're done with the ribbing, you're just going to transfer all of your stitches to the main bed.
Now this sock can be done starting with a rib, and you can knit down to the toe, or you can actually start at the toe and knit to the rib if you're not sure if you have enough sock yarn to make the socks as long as you want, because this actually took up pretty much a whole skein of yarn. But I also had like a little bit of yarn left when I made my son's socks to make baby socks. So that's super fun if you know anyone that has an infant, and I would totally show those to you, except I already gave them away.
So we are done with the ribber. We are switching our tension to tension 5 and resetting our row counter. And now we are going to knit from the ribbing to the heel of our foot where we're going to start our short rows.
Now, of course, there's always stuff that you maybe don't like about the pattern. I don't love that I always have to figure out my gauge on a swatch. I have been using sock yarn, and so I've just been using the same gauge for all my sock yarn. I know that's not necessarily recommended, but I might be a lazy knitter. I don't know. And I'm excited to use this Must Be Merino linen yarn. Well, the color's linen. It is part acrylic and part nylon and 50% merino, but it's super soft. So I'm kind of interested in what kind of a sock this is going to give me.
Now for the short rowing, we are going to put half of the stitches out into hold. We are going to set our carriage for hold, and then we are going to pull the needle out nearest the carriage into holding position as well, and then we will knit 1 row. We're always pulling out the needle that's closest to the carriage. And then we knit 1 row. And we continue this until we get as many center stitches as we need, which the pattern will tell you how many center stitches you are knitting to. You'll also want to add weights as needed. Every machine is different, so you may need to put weights on each side while you're short rowing, or just the middle may be fine. You may not need a weight until you start short rowing back.
So now I have 12 needles back here, and so I'm going to reverse my short rowing. So I'm pushing 1 needle out
on the opposite side of the carriage. So even though I just pulled this one out, I'm starting this one back in at the same time. So now we're going to wrap the needle that we're going back over, just the end needle, and we're pushing the needle opposite the carriage into working position. So wrap and push your needle back. And then here's where you'll notice that you really need the weights. You can put them on the back, you can put them on the front. It's a little harder to put them on the back.
It can be very easy to get distracted here, so just make sure that you're doing both things, the wrapping and the pushing the needle back into work, so that you don't miss anything, so that you don't get mixed up and end up with the wrong number of needles at the end, because that's very frustrating.
Now this time I'm going to put my row counter back, or my machine, my carriage back to normal position, so it will knit even these needles that are out of hold, and it's going to knit this last one that would be going back into work, but I don't need to put that into work. And I'm going to reset my row counter. And knit the length from the heel to the toe.
You may want to grab our pattern whether you are a beginner sock knitter or an experienced sock knitter, because this is made for any size. You can choose your size, your measurements. I actually just made some wool socks that are triple E for extra wide feet. But you can use any yarn and any machine. So if you have a LK150, you can use that machine. You just plug in your gauge, your measurements for your feet. You can print out your pattern, and then you are all set to get knitting your socks.
So you're going to short row the toe the same exact way that you short rowed the heel, except when you are to the last part where you go all the way across, you're actually going to do that with waste yarn. And then that waste yarn is going to allow you to do the Kitchener stitch to stitch up the area before the toe, and then you will mattress stitch the side seam of your sock. Make sure before you cut your yarn that you do leave a long enough tail in order to do that Kitchener stitch.
I hope you got some new tips and tricks from this tutorial, and don't forget to give your knitting machine some love this week.